Welcome once more to the never-ending struggle with Charles Coulomb. That's me here on Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And today we're going to look at a period of Catholic history that's often forgotten. Over 100 years ago, a group of young men from all over the world, all over the Catholic world, came to literally fight for Blessed Pope Pius IX. They were called the papal Zouaves. Zouaves, Zouaves. It's an odd name, and I'll explain in a minute where it comes from. But first, we have to look at the thought of young men coming from all over to fight for the Pope. To fight, to die, to kill for the Holy Father. This sounds kind of strange and outrageous to us today, of course, but it came about for some very important reasons, which have to do really with the entire course of Western history. What was that? Well, they were defending something we don't think about very much today, and that is the temporal sovereignty of the papacy. Now, we know the Pope is, of course, the head of the Church. That we know. But from at least the 500s until the present, the Pope has also been temporal ruler, sovereign of a country. Now, the current incarnation of that country is a very tiny little place called Vatican City, the Vatican City-State. But once upon a time, the popes ruled most of central Italy. And to understand these young men who in the middle of the 19th century came to defend that temporal sovereignty, we have to understand first a little bit of its history and why the popes had it. First and foremost, the thing to remember is that in the late Roman Empire, starting about 476 AD, when the last Roman emperor in the West was deposed, and the emperor at Constantinople became the nominal ruler of Rome, through the various invasions by people like the Ostrogoths and the Lombards and so on, gradually the Pope became the major temporal as well as religious leader in Rome. He became responsible for the welfare of the city of Rome and its environs. For the first part of this period, up until the 700s, the Pope was nominally subject as a temporal ruler to the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople. Now, in return, the Constantinople emperors had to protect Rome and the papal state from people like the Lombards, who were an invading German tribe who had come in the 500s. Well, as time went on, the Muslims invaded the Middle East. They took Syria and the Holy Land and Egypt from the Byzantines, and that kept the Byzantines very busy. So they had less and less time to really worry about what was going on in the Italian peninsula. That being the case, the popes had to look for some other protector, and they found him. They found him in the kingdom of the Franks, who were the German tribe who, after converting to Catholicism, took over all of what had been Gaul and is now France. In turn, these Franks in the 700s crossed the Alps and sent troops on several occasions to protect Rome from the Lombards. This solidified the alliance between the popes and the Franks. In 800, Pope Leo III crowned on Christmas Day Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Emperor. He revived the empire in the West. But the Emperor Charlemagne, like his father Pepin, donated a lot of territory to the Holy See. And so the temporal sovereignty of the Holy See was born officially. The middle section of the Italian peninsula, the area we call Latium, Umbria, the Marches, and Romagna, at varying times, various places, this section became the Papal States. And that was how they were known for over 1,000 years. Now, Today, we think of the Pope being a temporal ruler. Why would he need that? That's, he's just purely spiritual. But what historical experience showed the popes was that if they did not have temporal independence, then whichever power they were temporally subject to would try to basically, turn them into sort of chaplains, like the patriarchs of Constantinople had undergone. The popes would be unable to be truly independent and play a mediating role between the different Christian rulers if they were completely dominated by any one of them. And so holding on to the independence of the national independence, if you will, of the papacy became an extremely important goal of succeeding popes. And mind you, it came under all sorts of challenges in the years leading up to the French Revolution from the time of Charlemagne, 900 years. Sometimes it was the Holy Roman Emperors, sometimes it was again the Byzantine Emperors, sometimes it was the kings of France. It varied. Often enough, it was local Italian nobles and warlords of various kinds who would try to subject the papacy, and every now and then succeeded. Well, in 1846, a new pope was elected who took the name Pius IX. Now, prior to him, you had a pope who was the bane of liberals in Italy, in Europe, and the world. His name was Gregory XVI. And he was pretty hated by those folks. As a result, the Papal States acquired a terrible reputation for being backward and dictatorial and so forth. Well, when Pius IX came to the throne, he was considered something of a liberal, and liberals everywhere rejoiced. But 2 years later, there was a revolution in Rome in 1848, and Pius IX saw his prime minister murdered in front of him. It altered his views considerably. And so, although he was driven out of Rome for a period, he came back in 1849 and resolved that the Papal States would remain papal forever. Well, this wasn't a problem for 10 years. But then, in 1859, something changed the whole balance of power. Now, Italy at this time was divided into a number of different countries. Southern Italy was under the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which was a Bourbon, the Bourbon family of Naples ruled it. Then you had the Papal States. North of them was the Grand Duchy of Tuscany under a branch of the Habsburgs. North of them was the Duchy of Modena under a different branch of the Habsburgs. The Duchy of Parma under a different branch of the Bourbons. The Kingdom of Sardinia under the House of Savoy. The Lombardo-Venetian Kingdom under the Emperor of Austria. So those were the Italian states. Now, sadly, and I do mean sadly, the government in Sardinia changed in 1831 when the main line of the House of Savoy died out. Having fought alongside Britain and France in the Crimean War in 1853, they now had two powerful allies. The Sardinians were ready to begin their conquest of the peninsula. The first thing to do, however, was to get rid of the Austrians. Sardinia did not have the means to fight Austria herself, but Cavour and the Sardinian leadership were able to convince the French Emperor Napoleon III to declare war on Austria and provided means across Sardinia for them to transport their troops. Well, the French and the Austrians fought in the Franco-Austrian War in 1859. The Austrians were defeated and, in essence, pushed out of their position as guarantors of the peace of the peninsula. Then the French traded Lombardy, which they had taken from Austria, and gave it to Sardinia, and were given what are now Savoy and Nice by Sardinia. Those became part of France, which they remain today. Then the Sardinians invaded Parma and Modena and the Papal States. They took the area called Romagna, and they took Tuscany. They called on the Pope to surrender his states to Sardinia. If that weren't bad enough, a revolutionary named Garibaldi landed in Sicily and relatively quickly conquered the kingdom of the Two Sicilies. So, and then turned his territories over to Sardinia. So the Pope was literally caught between two terrible, terrible positions: the Sardinians on the north and Garibaldi on the south. Someone else might have surrendered, because the Sardinians declared that if the Pope would surrender his domains peacefully, they would allow him to remain in Rome at their patronage. As I said before, the popes down through history had not wanted to become the ward of a given temporal power. So Pius IX declared that he would not do this. He refused. And he asked his Minister of War, Colonel de Merode, to mobilize an army. How was he going to do this? Well, he would send out an appeal to young men all over the Catholic world to come to Rome to fight for him. That being the case, however, they needed someone to command this army. As it happened, the Minister of War, Colonel de Merode, had a cousin, Colonel Lamoricière. Now, Lamoricière had a very interesting story, because he was a French army officer who had taken part in the French invasion of Algeria, in the 1840s. While there, he had raised a group of Italian, my mind's gone, no, not Italian, North African natives. And based upon one of their tribal names, these were called Zouaves. In time, they went into other units and they were replaced with native Frenchmen. When the French originated the Zouave infantry, other countries imitated it. Most notably the United States. That's why in our Civil War, there were Zouave units in both the Union and the Confederate armies. But you had them in Brazil, you had them in Poland, you had them in a lot of different places. Lamoricière, as the originator of the concept, when he was hired by his cousin to command the papal army, he set to work recruiting a similar unit, organizing a similar unit out of the many, many volunteers that came to Rome. Where do they come from? Well, they did come from all over the Catholic world, but the largest numbers came from France, Ireland, a good number from Spain, lots from Belgium and the Netherlands, some from Germany and Austria, a few from Poland, a few from the United States, England, Scotland, a lot from French Canada, from Quebec. And this incredibly mixed bunch of men, first and foremost, had to present letters from their pastors declaring that they were practicing Catholics. And it was a very unusual kind of army. Swearing wasn't allowed. Church-going was required. Everyone had mass devotions that they had to attend. They said the rosary together and so on. In time, the Sacred Heart became one of their major devotions as they grew as a unit and went through various campaigns and so forth. Their unit identity became very much bound up with the Sacred Heart, but more of this momentarily. So, Lamoricière organized his men. He had a problem. The armies he faced were much larger than what he had. Initially, he had his men sort of parcel out along the border with the new Sardinian border. When the Sardinians invaded in 1860, he decided to concentrate his troops either around Rome or bring them to the port of Ancona in the north, where there was a big fortress. He felt they could hold out there until, it was hoped, help came from Austria or Spain or somebody. Well, that's not exactly how it happened, because when his army they reached the town of Loreto, and they were preparing to reach Ancona when the Sardinians, pushing south, cut them off. The result was a great battle called Castelfidardo, and it really is an amazing story. The Zouaves are outgunned, outnumbered, but they fought valiantly. They came close to winning their way through, but in the end, the numbers were too great. They were defeated, and the city of Ancona withstood a long siege, but finally surrendered when it was apparent there was no help coming either from the now defeated papal column or from Austria or Spain. So all of the papal states outside Lazio, or what was called then the patrimony of St. Peter, the area around Rome, fell to Sardinia. The king of Sardinia moved from Torino to Florence, which became the capital of his new kingdom of Italy. The French, in the meantime, sent troops to keep Rome independent under the Pope. And so things sat for a while. But the emperor, Napoleon III, was an interesting man, and actually a lot of the story depends on him. Napoleon III was the nephew of the great Napoleon, under whom the popes had suffered so much. And he, on the one hand, wanted to be the heir, like his uncle, of the French Revolution. He wanted to be modern, he wanted to be liberal, etc. But he also was a believing Catholic and wanted to be a legitimate monarch. So these two impulses constantly went back and forth in his mind. And if you study his policies, you'll see they went back and forth the same way. So at first you find him supporting Cavour and the attack against Austria in 1859. But then in 1860, he decides, no, we've got to protect the Pope. So he sends troops to reinforce the papal positions around Rome. In 1866, the Austrians still held Venetia, the area around Venice. And in 1866, they went to war with Prussia and were defeated. Now, the Sardinians attempted to take advantage of this and attacked, but they were defeated by the Austrians. Nevertheless, their ally Prussia insisted that Austria give up Venetia, which they did. It became part of Italy. Well, in the light of that, Napoleon III made a deal with the Italians that he would pull out of Rome and let the Pope take care of himself. Well, he did. And the result was an invasion of what was left of the Papal States by an army under Garibaldi. Well, the pressure mounted on Napoleon III at home. He sent troops back, and the papal troops and French troops together defeated Garibaldi in a battle called Mentana. Many, many Garibaldian troops were captured, and to their intense surprise and shock, Blessed Pius IX pardoned them all. They were expecting death or worse at the hands of the papacy. Didn't happen. But certainly the pressure grew higher and higher on the Pope and on what was left of his territories. But in the meantime, recruits continued to come in, a lot of Dutch, a lot of French Canadians. For the French Canadians in particular, the sending of the papal Zouaves was a key chapter in the formation of the French Canadian national identity. To this day, you have small organizations of Zouave descendants in Quebec, wearing the old uniforms and so on.